Is there any better way to symbolise the ties between two nations than to gift them with a steam locomotive? I know I'd be grateful. It is Regatta Day. Wait, no. It is 4th of July Day. So I hope all of my American viewers enjoy celebrating by watching fireworks be set free. I think that's the reason behind it, right? Transportation is obviously a fantastic symbol to show the bonds between different countries and continents. You'd expect a jet plane or an ocean liner to represent this unity, but many times in our recent history, it's a more landlocked form of transportation that has crossed the oceans instead. Considered as the mother nation of the railways, a fact that we refuse to let the world forget, Great Britain has proudly represented itself through the use of railway engines. More often than you might have realised, spotlessly polished steam locomotives have been sent to North America as ambassadors for their railways back home. Most made it home, others were there to stay, and some of these adventures very nearly ended in catastrophe. I'm Max, or Terrier55 Stepney, and in today's American-themed Guide Rail special, we'll be taking a look at as many examples as possible of British locomotives that have gone to America and Canada. Upon researching for this video, there were some big names in the rail industry that I knew would be coming up, like Flying Scotsman's ill-fated tour in the 1960s and 70s. However, there were many lesser-known examples of engines that have gone from the UK to the US, and indeed many others that are probably still unnoticed now. Now, just to clarify before we start this video, we're not going to be covering every single engine ever that has gone from the UK to the USA, more the ones that have been sent there for one-off reasons. Over 200 years of railway history, locomotive manufacturers in the UK have exported their designs to work all around the world. In fact, the first engines to ever run in North America were built in England. Following the Stockton and Darlington Railway's trail in 1825, a tech innovation was boiling that many wanted to be a part of. The Delaware and Hudson Canal Company sent engineer Horatio Allen to see what all the fuss was about. He returned with an engine built by Robert and George Stephenson, known as Pride of Newcastle, and 3 engines by John Rastrick. It was one of these, called Stourbridge Lion, that first ran on American soil on the 8th of August 1829. Early American railroads began to construct their own locomotives, but continued to import and export their designs with the UK still. This led to a friendly rivalry each time an advancement was made in the rail industry. Famously, Sir Nigel Gresley's A1 class was inspired by the Pennsylvania Railroad's K4 class, whereas the Great Western's King class would influence the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad's Lord Baltimore class. The idea of sending a locomotive away on a ship purely for the sake of it and not to work elsewhere was not unheard of. In fact, it happened many times before Flying Scotsman's infamous tour in the 1960s. Way back in 1893, the Chicago World Fair set the stage for many companies to show off what they could do. Also known as the World's Columbian Exposition, over 25 million visitors were reported to have attended. the Great Western Railway sent their broad gauge loco, Lord of the Isles, even though it had been withdrawn the previous decade. Perhaps still bitter about losing out to the standard gauge that was adopted in most places, the GWR held on to both this and North Star until 1906, when someone finally decided that they were taking too much space at Swindon Works, and controversially sent them for scrap. More eager to push their recent creations, the London and North Western rivaled them with the patriotically named Greater Britain class. Number 3435 Queen Empress, complete with a train, was in the same hall. This even ran an excursion to New York and back, possibly the first time that a complete British train had run in the US. You couldn't have done that with broad gauge. Designed by Francis Webb, this too would be scrapped in 1906, but it was still a greater career than another loco being advertised at the exhibition. Little-known English engineer F.C. Winby had commissioned Hawthorne and Leslie to build an unusual 4220. With 2 sets of cylinders powering the 2 sets of driving wheels, the loco mysteriously known as James Tolman was not a success, and did not take off in America as had been hoped. In fact, even after a rebuild to make it more conventional, it could hardly move itself, and was taken off the rails to the engineering department at Purdue University, who eventually got rid of it. Fast forward to 1927 and to another big celebration. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad was turning 100, so they hosted a centennial fair of the Iron Horse in September and October. Fresh out of Swindon Works, the Great Western Railway decided to send their brand new express engine to show America what they'd been up to since 1893. The first of the class, number 6000 King George V, had its boiler removed for the trip across the pond. On the other side, it was reassembled under the watchful eye of Sir William Stanier, who would soon become the Chief Mechanical Engineer of the London, Midland and Scottish Railway. More on that later. In Baltimore, a row of bleachers, which are seats, ironically called stands if you're English, was set up along the demonstration line. It was a great railway show, if you will, with engines over the previous 100 years parading past it like it was a dressage show. Still mourning the loss of their beloved broad gauge, and the engines that were accidentally scrapped, the GWR also made a replica of North Star, and sent that as well, just for old time's sake. Their actual star was the King, which ran tours between Washington, Baltimore and Philadelphia. Though the stay was brief, the railroad gifted the engine with commemorative medals, and a bell to wear at the front of the running board. The bell actually had an adventure all on its own. The story goes that during World War II back in England, American army soldiers, missing their homeland, stole the bell from the engine. Finding it too heavy to take back home as a keepsake from their visit, or fearing the consequences, it was later found thrown into the Serpentine River in Hyde Park. All the while, the Great Western had made a replica bell that never got used. And so the original remains with the engine to this day. King George V is now part of the National Collection, but is on loan to the Steam Museum where it had been built in Swindon. The London, Midland and Scottish Railway paid attention to what the Great Western had done, which seemed to be a running theme. Yet another big global trade spectacle was held in 1933, this time called the Century of Progress International Exposition, based in Chicago. The LMS agreed to send their latest express train, the Royal Scot. However, a bit more tactical in their game, they were a bit wary of sending the first of their class, which had already been running for 6 years. The last thing they'd want is for their engine to break down whilst on parade. In the workshops for general maintenance at the time was younger sibling number 6152, King's Dragoon Guardsman. So the LMS decided to swap the identities of the two locomotives. King's Dragoon Guardsman was renamed and renumbered to 6100 Royal Scot, whilst that engine was to stay behind and pretend that everything was fine. The new Royal Scot was made as mechanically sound as possible, and fitted with a new headlamp and bell. Together with 8 typical coaches from London to Scotland services, they were to be the only UK railway company at the event. But the fact that entire trains like this were even thought to be sent to these fairs truly shows how proud a marvel of engineering the railways were at this time. The tour began at Windsor Station in Montreal, and weaved its way through various stops until culminating in Chicago. After the exhibition, the train was due to sail back home, but dozens of calls were coming in from other states asking if the train would visit them. So the LMS agreed to extend the adventure, and Royal Scot travelled the length and breadth of both the USA and Canada, allegedly not suffering any major mechanical faults. Over 11,000 miles were travelled, with over 3 million visitors coming to see the train, in all climates and all times of day. When it safely returned home, so pleased with how famous it had become, the identities of the two engines were never switched back. This led to the original Royal Scot, now King's Dragoon Guardsman, being scrapped in 1965. Ouch. Having worn the name for much longer at this point, the newer Royal Scot was bought by Billy Butlin to become a static display at his Skegness holiday park. It moved to the Bressingham Steam Museum, then to the Royal Scot Loco Trust, having returned once more to the main line. The LMS were blown away by the reception that Royal Scot had received overseas, and the UK government felt that it had done a great deal to boost relations with America. So they decided to do it all again. Another World Fair in 1939, where all of the big industry-leading companies gave themselves a pat on the back for their work, this time held in New York. If you check your history books, something quite significant happened in 1939, and it was perhaps a brave time to show off a new train by sending it across the Atlantic. LMS officials noted that they admired the courage and foresight shown in organising the New York World's Fair, at a time when trade had been receding, and when the world outlook is not wholly peaceful. Hope was still there that sending the latest Premier Express from the UK as a flag-waving mascot, would keep Britain in America's good books, should they ever need their help. So this time they sent William Stanier's Coronation Scot. Once again, after it had been involved in a small accident, and nearly become a wreck after its record-breaking speed run, the LMS didn't want to send the original 6220 Coronation. Instead, they chose the newer 6229 Duchess of Hamilton, and played the old switched identity trick again. This time it was a bit more obvious. The first 5 coronations were streamlined, painted in a distinct blue and silver. Duchess of Hamilton, meanwhile, was painted red and gold. The 2 engines swapped numbers and names, but not liveries. So there was suspiciously a blue Duchess of Hamilton left in the UK, whilst a red Coronation sailed for America. A bell and headlamp were once again fitted, and a unique matching set of Crimson Lake coaches, with gold lining down the sides, painted especially for the journey. It was so cold upon arriving in Baltimore that the driver caught pneumonia, and so the fireman was promoted to driver. Meanwhile, Mr. Robert Riddles became fireman, who would go on to oversee the creation of the British Railways standard classes. You could say that it was a good first-hand experience of different operating conditions on the footplate to influence his future designs, particularly as the American coal caused the fire bars to melt. Ending its tour at the New York exhibition, the Duchess Coronation completed a 3,100-mile tour, again as far as Chicago. This time there wasn't the fanfare to see the train travel as far as Royal Scot had only a few years earlier. Really, the engine wouldn't be going anywhere for some time. Coronation was due to be sent home in October, by which point the dawn of World War II had arisen. Concerned that it would be seen as sending equipment to aid the UK, and therefore at risk of being targeted by German U-boats, the train was given a low priority to be sailed home, so was stranded in the USA until 1943. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad kindly stored the engine away until the opportunity where it could be returned, whilst the coaches stayed for the duration of the war as temporary accommodation for US soldiers. With speed records and luxury now of little concern, the LMS actually swapped the identities back between Coronation and Duchess of Hamilton, which were both painted in wartime black. Each also lost their streamlined casing, and Coronation was eventually scrapped in 1963. Duchess of Hamilton, meanwhile, as the actual USA Tour engine, was bought straight after withdrawal in 1964. Like Royal Scot, it became an exhibit at one of the Butlins holiday camps, this time in Minehead. In 1975, it was loaned and eventually became part of the National Collection, running excursions on the main line, and eventually regaining its streamlined casing. The engine is now on display at the National Railway Museum in York, and the bell from its USA trip still survives as well. Perhaps inspired by these epic American adventures, we should probably talk about the obvious example of an engine travelling far beyond the British Isles. The Flying Duchess? This is not an engine that you'd expect to have seen the world, considering it started life shunting around a tiny yard. Heard that before. This is a Robert Stephenson and Hawthorne designed industrial tank engine, built to work at the Method Power Station in Staffordshire. From 1952 to 1970, it was known simply as Number 2 there, before being replaced by diesels. For reasons that I cannot define, other than they must have been offered cheap and in operable condition, this humble little tank engine and 3 BR Mark I coaches were sold to the Boyne City Railroad in Grand Falls, Michigan. This was an independent railroad with a troubled financial history, primarily being a freight line running for 7 miles. However, passenger excursions were also run to Boyne Falls, and for 8 years, that is what this anomaly of a train would do. Perhaps as an amalgamation of 2 famous British names that had visited the United States, the engine gained the name Flying Duchess, and was repainted into a fictional green livery. The poor condition of the railroad itself meant that trains were suspended in 1978, and soon abandoned. 2 of the 3 Mark I coaches are now at the Standish Depot project, whereas the engine was sent to the Tennessee Valley Railroad in Chattanooga. With a lack of documentation to certify the boiler, it was only briefly run there. By 2000, Flying Duchess had been forgotten about, and was sold on to Indiana, then to a scrapyard in Louisville, Kentucky. Being such an obscure item, its future was very uncertain. But in 2011, it was finally rescued by the LaGrange Railroad Museum. Here it sits alongside the main line as a welcome display, with ongoing cosmetic restoration to return it as Method Power Station Number 2 on one side, and the Flying Duchess on the other. As it was bought simply to offer steam train rides to a short-lived railroad group, Flying Duchess is perhaps less of a glamorous icon than the legends of steam that had visited before, but equally a lucky survivor. For instance, there's the engine it took half of its name from. This is surely the most well-known engine on this list. Having bought the engine privately in 1963, Alan Pegler had run Flying Scotsman on excursion trains throughout the UK. This was actually the only steam engine permitted to run on the main line after British Railways had officially banned them in favour of diesel. However, not satisfied with that, Pegler wanted to have a go at driving for himself. UK railway law prevented him from doing so, but the rules were less strict in America at the time. Inspired by the pre-war publicity that Royal Scot and Coronation had stirred on their tours, he convinced Prime Minister Harold Wilson that the ex-LNER star should do the same. A special exhibition train was formed to show the best of Britain overseas, and in September 1969 the Scotsman embarked for America. As was tradition by now, the Southern Railroad presented the engine with a new headlamp to go with its new cowcatcher, couplings, chime whistle, and a bell. The cowcatcher and parts of the water tender still survive today, though not often displayed with the engine itself. The first part of the tour started in Boston, Massachusetts, working over 2 months as far west as Houston, Texas. By that point, back in the UK, the government had changed, and the support that they'd agreed upon for the trip suddenly vanished. The tour itinerary was altered so that Flying Scotsman would now travel north to the National Railroad Museum in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Here, 2 Pullman cars that had been along for the ride, used as mobile offices by General Dwight D. Eisenhower, were to be delivered. There was a far-from-home reunion, with the LNER A4 named after him as well. Then Flying Scotsman ventured into Canada. By now, funding the excursion himself, Alan Pegler was very nearly bankrupt, but had one last idea to end the tour on a high note. A festival called British Week was being held in San Francisco, where of course Flying Scotsman would fit right in. So, taking on hitchhikers and running across the entire continent, they made their way to the west coast, where the train was displayed on Fisherman's Wharf. Over 15,000 miles had been travelled, and there had been many encounters with local steam, diesel and electric trains of the era that will never be repeated again. Unlike Duchess of Hamilton being stranded due to war, Flying Scotsman's downfall was due to debt. After complaints that they were blocking the view and parking spaces of the local restaurants, like waiting for a never-ending train at a level crossing, they had to be moved to a quieter part of the city. Here, visitor numbers dropped, Alan Pegler declared bankruptcy, and the engine had to be hidden away at a nearby army depot, so that liquidators couldn't claim it. This disaster of course has a reprieve, as George Hinchcliffe assisted Sir William McAlpine to save Flying Scotsman and bring it home. In secret, it was snuck across the San Francisco Bay and sailed off through the Panama Canal, arriving back home in 1973. After the incredibly brave decision to then send the engine to Australia, Flying Scotsman made 2 more owners go bankrupt before finally being bought by the National Railway Museum at York. At the time this video was made, it celebrated its 100th birthday out in steam on the main line. I mentioned that Flying Scotsman encountered one of its cousins all the way out in Wisconsin. This was LNER A4 number 6008 Dwight D. Eisenhower, named in honour of the Supreme Commander of the Expeditionary Force in Europe during World War II. For most of its career, this engine was number 4496 Golden Shuttle. Its new name was given in 1946. A visitor to the museum in Green Bay mentioned to a gardener that she had seen an engine over in England, named after the then president. The gardener turned out to be the board chairman to the museum, who wrote to British Railways asking if they could preserve the engine. BR said no, since the A4 was still in active service. So he tried again in a few years, when it was withdrawn in July 1963. So, just like Mallard, number 6008 was instantly saved for preservation. Restoration and a trip overseas, with 2 LNER Thompson teak coaches, saw the engine arrive at the relatively new National Railroad Museum in Green Bay. This was a commemorative gift to the United States for their role in the war, with the man it was named after even coming to visit. The locomotive has remained on display there almost ever since. Recently, one of the two coaches has been clad with armour, as had been done during its service in World War II. It is not the only member of the class to have found a new home in North America, though. Number 4489 Woodcock was another one of Gresley's A4s, thankfully renamed to Dominion of Canada in June 1937. Several LNER engines were named in honour of Commonwealth countries, being distinguished with features such as stainless steel letters, and in Dominion of Canada's case, the Canadian coat of arms on the cab, a Canadian Pacific Railroad bell, and a 5-chime steam whistle were added to the front. Though not to comply with regulations this time, as the engine spent its entire career in the UK. When it was removed to fit a new double chimney in 1957, the chime was actually used in trials to determine what the new whistles would be for the British Railways standard classes. The engine went in for repairs at Darlington Works in 1965, but was found to be in poor condition, so was withdrawn and forgotten about. It was actually listed as for scrap, but had been so tucked away out of sight in the overgrown sidings that it wasn't found again until after the sheds had closed, the following year. A bit of an afterthought, but as had been done with Dwight D. Eisenhower, it was decided to cosmetically restore the engine and present it as a gift to the Canadian Railway Museum, known as Expo Rail, in Quebec. Due to the position of the newer double chimney, the bell and whistle couldn't be refitted, and it was found cheaper to repaint it into BR Brunswick green, as was the standard at the time. A shunting accident caused by a Buckeye coupling saw the front end damaged in 2008. But otherwise, the engine has had a quiet existence, on display amongst more local artefacts. That changed in 2012, when a call came in from York for a family reunion of all 6 surviving A4s, in time to celebrate 75 years since Mallard broke the speed record. Against all of the odds of moving them away from their permanent homes, both Dwight D. Eisenhower in the States and Dominion of Canada in Canada were extracted from their museums and sent away to the docks. In Dwight D. Eisenhower's case, as the museum was built around the engines inside, the buffers had to be removed, and the engine slid across the floor sideways to get it back into daylight. Nearly 50 years since they'd left, back in the UK, both engines were restored. Dwight D. Eisenhower regained a true coat of BR green, whilst Dominion of Canada was returned to LNER Garter blue. The addition of a single chimney finally meant that the Canadian bell and whistle could be reunited with the engine, which was still in the same crates that they had been sent away in. The true reunion was in 2013. Both at York and Shildon, the 6 surviving streaks were lined up to create the Great Gathering, a spectacle that is unlikely to be repeated anytime soon. Both of the far-travelled A4s were also posed at Barrow Hill Roundhouse, before in 2014 being returned to their own museums. Still, Dominion of Canada has another British engine for company, all the way across the Atlantic. But that is a story for next time. Now, we've already covered a lot of different examples of British steam engines that have somehow found their way to North America. Equally, there might be some that you find are missing from this list. So let me know in the comments if there are some examples that you know of, as we will be back with part 2, showing more of the obscure examples that have been found overseas. Do consider subscribing so you don't miss part 2, and join by becoming a channel patron in the link in the description to support future content like this. You get exclusive rewards like your name read out in the credits, and bonus weekly posts of what I'm working on now. There's a new instalment of Guide Rail on the first Friday of every month, so I will see you next time. A big thank you to the following channel patrons: Alex Goodman, GBH Train, D0280 Falcon, Sean Tempest, Random Thomas Fan, Dark White 73, Andrew Dyack, Reese Lee Walter, Ryan RTS, Ewan Pentland, Steam Power 4472, Jude 72, Firewind 10, Luneacres Photography, Mario Sonic 64, Elias, Soda Fox Art, TJOC 9891, Tamsy, and Insane Edward.